Okay, those are 6th grade and up. I have a word for you to count. Count the word Ruth in my sermon, and I have a surprise for you, all right? So if you're pretty close, count the word Ruth, all right? And see me after my sermon, all right? If you have a bulletin, if you don't have a bulletin, we have extra bulletins, maybe. I have one here. Is this yours?
You can have it. Give it away.
Or is that yours?
There's 2 of them. No, that's fine.
All right. Anybody need a bulletin? Okay. All right. There's probably more in the back, too, if anybody that needs one. All right. So we're starting a new series on the book of Ruth, all right? And really, with the book of Ruth, we're kind of going into leading in talking about homes and relationships. Homes and our home and our relationships that we have. All right? So this is our first sermon in this series. And I wanted to start with this introduction. In James Dobson's book, the book is called Love Must Be Tough. He tells of the grave impact that is occurring as families disintegrate. And this is what he writes. He says, the most vulnerable victims of family instability are the children, who are too young to understand what has happened to their parents. True, right? That tragic impact on the next generation was graphically illustrated in a recent conversation with a 6th grade teacher in an upper middle class California city, all right? And so she was shocked to see the results of this creative writing task assigned to her students. They were asked to complete a sentence. And the sentence goes like this. It began with the words, I wish. And then they were supposed to put down what they wished for. I wish. The teacher expected the boys and girls to express wishes for bicycles, dogs, kitty cats, television sets, maybe a trip to Hawaii, or maybe Florida. Maybe people from here would want to go to Disney or in California or somewhere. Yeah, she was expecting that kind of thing. Because they were from California, she was thinking they'd want to go to Hawaii. But she came up with, there were so many unique answers to this question she gave those kids, I wish. So these are some of the responses to their own disintegrating families. A few of their actual sentences were as follows. I wish my parents wouldn't fight. And I wish my father would come back. Here's another one. I wish my mother didn't have a boyfriend. I wish I could get straight A's so my father would love me. Here's another. I wish I had one mom and one dad so the kids wouldn't make fun of me. I wish I had an M1 rifle so I could shoot those who made fun of me. That's happening. For a little kid, that person needs some counseling, right? Because they're the ones that are going into the schools. I wish. Disintegrating families. Some of the attacks of the home are obvious, but others are hidden. Hidden dangers exist. Over the next few weeks in Ruth, how many times have I said Ruth? 3 times now. Count those names. How many times did I say Ruth? Okay. So in Ruth, the next few weeks, we're going to be studying this book, an old book about a love story. Let's look at verse 1. Ruth, verse 1 of chapter 1. So as we discover some hidden dangers, let's look at this verse. During the time of the judges, there was a famine in the land. A man left Bethlehem in Judah with his wife and 2 sons to live in the land of Moab for a while. Okay, if you're there taking notes, number 1, the problem that will stress the home. This is going to be the problem that will stress the home. Today, just as in Bible times, the home is being pressured from all sides. If you haven't noticed that, you're going to find out. That just happens, right? You've already noticed it. It's pressured on all sides. And consider the pressures that threaten to harm the home. Let's go to that first point in number 1. Problems from cultural sources. Problems from cultural sources. Hey, and we're going to have some of those here, right? In the big island of Hawaii. Lots of culture going around. And we all have some of our own culture. And there's problems that will stress them. And part of it is problems from cultural sources. Ruth 1:1 said, during the time of the judges. This is the time that the judges ruled. All right? Judges 21:25 says, and it provides probably the best commentary on that time. This is what that verse says. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did whatever he wanted. Judges 21:25. Everyone, another version says, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That day was really like today, right? Isn't that like today? People doing whatever they want and however they want and whenever they want. It was happening back then. It's happening today. Even then, the world struggled with moral relativism and in-your-face immorality, excessive narcissism. There are people that's all they thought about was themselves. It's happening today. It was happening back then. All these things were unrestrained self-expression and inconsistent role models. All these things. Their message of morality was simple. Conform to nonconformity. Isn't that today? Just conform to being not a nonconformist, right? That's what the society is telling us today. That's what it was telling them. And also to tolerate everything except intolerance. Our society says that same thing except maybe for tolerating Christians, right? When that's a different story, and their biblical beliefs. I mean, they're saying to be tolerant to intolerance, but yeah, it's kind of goes different in our culture. Maybe theirs too. Let's go to B. Problems from natural forces. So we have the cultural forces. We also have problems with natural forces. Ruth chapter 1:1 said, there was a famine in the land. All right? Many of the pressures that impact our lives and our homes are neither moral nor immoral. Some things just happen. They occur because we live in a fallen, sinful world. And these things are part of the nature of living. We can recognize these problems by two qualifiers, all right? Number one, they strike indiscriminately. They strike indiscriminately. No one, including believers, is immune from these type of problems. They just strike. They just happen. And they strike indiscriminately, not picking and choosing. You don't know what's going to happen. I mean, my car might break down this week. Your car might break, or your refrigerator might break down the next. I mean, these things just happen, right? Indiscriminately, you're struck by these problems. Number two, they are beyond our control. Take this family, for example. One day, a good man named Elimelech, which his name means, God is my king. That's his name. God is my king, Elimelech. He marries a sweet young lady named Naomi. Just a sweet lady. Her name means pleasant one or sweet one. So they get married. It seems like a marriage made in heaven. Then God and my king and the sweet one have two children. And on the surface, this appears to be a typical functional family, but things are not as seem. You see, the first son, we're told in Scripture, Mahlon was born and he looked sick. Well, he looked sick. Of course, they gave him an appropriate name, Sickly. So that was his name, Sickly, Mahlon. Kind of sad, right? Walking around with that name. Yeah, Sickly. Yeah. And Chilion, the second born, Chilion, was born small and weak. So they named him Pining or Wasting Away. Pining or Wasting Away. That was his name. So two kids, born kind of sad and maybe not so healthy, and you can tell by their names. That's what they did back then. Let's read Ruth chapter 1, verses 1b and 2, verse 2. A man left Bethlehem, in Judah, with his wife and two sons to live in the land of Moab for a while. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi. The names of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They entered the land of Moab, and they settled there. Now, why were two sickly children born to such a nice couple? I mean, they're sickly and they're not too healthy. And we got God is my king and sweet one get married, but they have sick children. Sad, kind of sickly. Why does that, they couldn't be a nicer couple. Why did this happen? Why did famines come? Why did that famine come? For that matter, why do any natural disasters occur? Why does anyone face a long-term illness? Why does any hard worker lose his or her job? Why does the market take a downturn? A lot of people that wanted to retire couldn't retire because something happened, the market crashed. Apart from specific occasions where God indicates that he sent or allowed adversity for a specific purpose, for most things we don't know. For the most part, these stressing circumstances just happen because we live in a sin-cursed world. We live in a world that's sin-cursed. Not any one individual's fault for a lot of these things that take place. Let's go to letter C. Problems from personal choices. Now we're getting a little bit more, individualized, problems with personal choices. Ruth 1:1 says, left Bethlehem to live in the land of Moab. Consider Elimelech's circumstance, all right? He had 4 months to feed during a time of famine. Surely the responsible thing to do is to take matters into your own hands and find food and employment anywhere you can. But what if doing so means you have to sacrifice your faith? Is it a good idea then to go to Moab if you're sacrificing your faith? Although it sounds innocent enough, going to Moab was like going to Sodom. According to Genesis chapter 19, let me read this verse. Genesis 19:37. The firstborn gave birth to a son and named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites of today. So here's the backstory. When Lot left Sodom, his daughters got him drunk and became impregnated by him. The name of their child born of the oldest daughter was Moab. All right? Well, those girls were probably not following God like they should have, right? They got their father drunk so they could have children by their father. Doing something that was against God. And so now we've got these girls that were not doing something they should have been doing. And we've got Moab, he's the father of all the Moabites. All right? So that's the backstory there. This one poor decision had a great impact on his family, then all outside problems combined. Notice the full consequence of this decision. Number one, I put, he disobeyed a direct command of God. He disobeyed a direct command of God. Have you ever considered the negative impact of your disobedience? In the eyes of maybe your children, maybe in the eyes of your friends when they see you disobey God. Further, this disobedience led to a state of ongoing disobedience. We will be reading I just read a verse in Judges, but we're going to be reading that we've read, and it talks about a covenant. We'll be reading this other one in a short minute or so, with the Moabites or any others that serve other gods. And if you bring your single sons to this land, who are they going to marry? Moabite women, right? And with Moabite women, the culture, who are they worshiping? Other gods, right? So as a father, you'd think through some of this, right? Elimelech did not. He did not. So they're making a covenant those sons are making covenants of marriage with the Moabite women. They directly disobeyed God. Before we go to Judges, let me read the next few verses of Ruth. Ruth 1, I'm going to read those 2b through 4. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They entered the land of Moab and settled there. Naomi's husband Elimelech died, and she was left with her 2 sons. Her sons took Moabite women as their wives, one named Orpah. I heard that Oprah was named after this one, but her mom just spelled it wrong. That's what I heard. And second was named Ruth. After they lived in Moab about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died within that 10-year span. Because remember, they're kind of sickly, right? So they didn't live as long. And Naomi was left without her 2 children and without her husband. So they settled there. The verse says they settled there. They remained there. And then verse 4 says they stayed about 10 years. So it was planning to be just a short time for the famine, but they stayed for 10 years. So number 2, he devalued his spiritual heritage in the sight of his family. He devalued his spiritual heritage. The land he owned was more than just a family farm. It was a spiritual inheritance that God gave his forefathers who farmed it before him. He didn't discern the spiritual significance of this faith inheritance. He passed on the message that the material and the momentary matter more than the spiritual. He got nervous. There was a famine. Decided to make his own choice. He didn't want to trust in God. Doesn't say that he even prayed. He just decided he was going to leave. It doesn't tell us that he prayed about it, or sought God's face regarding this problem. Elimelech just did what he wanted to do. Let's go to number 3. He positioned his family for great and grave temptations. He positioned his family for these great and grave temptations. Listen to Judges. I said I was going to read from Judges, verses 2 of 3 of chapter 2. You are not to make a covenant with the people who are living in this land, and you are to tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed me. What is this you have done? Therefore I now say, I will not drive out these people before you. They will be thorns in your side, and their gods will be a trap for you. So one of the consequences of his disobedience was this threat of thorns and snares from this pagan culture. I'm sure the wives of Mahlon and Chilion brought unbiblical views of God and morality into their marriages. Verse 4 tells us that they were married to these women. Their wives, that is how they were raised, right? Worshiping other gods, other customs. Let's go to point number 4. Though well-intended, moving to feed his family, his disobedience did not alleviate their problem, but it aggravated the problem. It aggravated them. So after his death, verse 5, and verse 3 and verse 5, they were left to struggle on their own without the help of those close relatives that they would have been living by before. They move and Elimelech dies, and then that 10-year span, both Mahlon and Chilion also died. We see that in verse 5. And Naomi was left with her 2 children, without her 2 children, and without her husband. So instead of looking to blame others for the problems that we face, perhaps we should re-examine the choices that we have made and really their true impact on our families. Consider maybe that big promotion that takes you out of church, or maybe the demands of the job take you away from your family. Even more than normal, the normal 40-hour week. Often we rationalize this by saying, well, when things go back to normal, I'll kind of go back to my family, or spend more time with my wife, or spend more time to my husband, or spend more time at the church, or be in Scripture. We kind of rationalize things. But we've forgotten that disobedience leads to a state of disobedience. When you disobey one time, it kind of leads down that road to more disobedience. And then comes other temptations that exciting new materialism can afford you. Maybe it's status. I don't know. Let's go to number 2. Point number 2. The premise that will test the home. Beyond the choice of Elimelech is a premise that has taken a serious toll on families. You can leave God out of the home and still have it all. We apply this premise in several ways. Let's go to the first point in A. We totally disregard God. The lost world suggests that we're getting along just fine without God. That's the way the lost world views God. Some are convinced that their home is better off if God stays out of their lives. They may want God only when he tickles their fancy. Some people maybe want to pray only when they want to or when they think it's important. Otherwise, they just stay away. They might say to God, "Butt out of my life. Leave me alone. It's my life." Another premise that will test the home is B. Limit your commitment to God. Limit your commitment to God. These confess to know God, yet they would have to admit we possess faith, but we just don't practice it. This was Elimelech. He believed he was a citizen of the celestial city, but he chose to live in the suburbs of sin. Like him, many simply have more important commitments than their relationship with God. Those commitments might include some good things. Good things. We spend our time on good things, but sometimes there might not be the best things. The finer things of life. Others, activities that override your commitment to Jesus. Jesus is the best thing. Let's go to C. We sometimes compartmentalize God. We compartmentalize him. These lived in the promised land. That is, they go to church sometimes, but leave church at church. They don't, however, bring their faith into their homes. They put their Christianity in like a little box. And this is my Christian box, and I'm going to get it out because I'm going to go to church on Sunday. But when I'm done, I'm going to put Christian back in the box, and I'm going to put it back on the shelf. They compartmentalize. They put their Christianity in a box and neatly put it away in the box and only get out when convenient. They don't want to sound too religious or churchy. They have forgotten Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 6 and 7, which instructs moms and dads to pass on their faith. That was our memory verse. These words that I'm giving you today are to be in your heart. Repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Don't compartmentalize God. Let's go to the third point. The promise that will bless the home. This is the promise that will bless the home. Hidden in this story about a man who believes he can leave God out of his life without consequences to his family are two redeeming promises. The first promise, the promise regarding God. He has not moved. God has not moved and still desires to have an intimate relationship with you. When we leave God for Moab, he waits for us where we left him. Like the father of the prodigal son, God had not moved. Perhaps after we have discovered the futility of living without God, we will realize that it's better to have less in Canaan with God than to have more in Moab without God. Let's go to B, point B, the promise regarding your inheritance. Remember this, when one leaves the promised land, fellowship with God for a land of empty but attractive promises, he may find fullness but will not find fulfillment. You're going to be full with all kinds of stuff, but you won't be fulfilled. Elimelech thought that leaving God and moving to Moab would solve his problems, but it simply created different problems. But here's the good news. I want to leave you with some good news. Good news is you may leave your inheritance from God, but you cannot lose it. I'm not suggesting that you can leave God, then come back, and everything will be just like it was. No, if Elimelech returned to his inheritance, he would have had to pull the weeds from his fields. He would have had to fix the fallen fences. He would have had to repair the leaky roof. But in time, it could be completely restored. With God, and only with God, can you have a full and satisfying life. Only with Him. And then, when you and I die, our true inheritance waits us. This world's not our home. We're just passing through. But one day, our true inheritance awaits you and awaits me. In conclusion, I have in your notes there to study this week. Maybe compare Abraham and Lot and his nephew, Abraham and his nephew Lot. It's a lot alike. The stories are a lot alike. While the other elder chose to live on the Judean hillside, Lot moved into the cities, the plains of Sodom. In a very real sense, Lot believed the same false premise that Elimelech believed and held. But in the end, Lot lost his family spiritually. Look what happened to his daughters, right? The father of the Moabites was his daughter getting Lot drunk. What happened to his wife? When she looked back at Sodom, she turned into a pillar of salt. Meanwhile, Abraham, despite his personal failures, became the father of the Israelites. You and I have a choice. There's so many things that are pressing in, pressing for our families, but choose Jesus. Choose the Lord. Let's close in a word of prayer. Dear God and Heavenly Father, we do thank you for this opening of the book of Ruth. Just talking about how the preface of the story. Lord, and how it relates to our families, our homes, our relationships. Oh God, may we not be like Elimelech and choose to cross over into Moab. But Lord, may we camp out with you. Choose to live holy, righteous lives. Lord, over choosing to sin. God, I believe you'll bless us if we make that choice. Just as you blessed Abraham. We love you and praise you for your goodness today. Be with each one here as you're maybe tugging at each heart differently. There might be someone here that's never given their life to Jesus, and they've never said, Lord, come into my life and ask you into their life. God, may this be the day that they come to know you as Lord and Savior. But Lord, those of us that are Christians, Lord, help us just to look at